The British Army came on, and a group of volunteers were knocking the bridge. A small bit of a skirmish took place with a few shots taking place, and the volunteers and later that evening 2 of the volunteers returned to the site to collect some of the tools that were being used for demolishing the bridge, and the British Army, who had still been in the area, spotted the 2 volunteers and opened fire on them, which resulted in a stomach injury for Charles O'Reilly, and the following day he died of his injuries. And it was a huge funeral in the area. He was a very well respected volunteer, he had trained work for his country. And the second volunteer, Richard Newman from Allihees in West Cork, had been at home at the time. He had been most involved with scouting, cutting trees and demolishing bridges and stuff in the West Cork area, and the British Army raided his home, and during the raid he attempted to escape before they got him, but they opened fire and they shot him dead. The other 4 volunteers all died during the main NAD roundup, which was one of the biggest roundups that had taken place in 1921, similar to the attempts at Coolavukig and later on at Crossbarry. And there was probably 1,000 to 1,500 British Army soldiers involved in the roundup, and it was a plan to capture the command staff of the 2nd Cork Brigade. So on the eve of the major roundup, Liam had received intelligence from a lady who'd worked in the barracks in Mallow that the plans were being made for a major roundup in the area, and he contacted a number of battalions such as in Kanturk and Charleville to set about destroying a number of bridges so they could kind of funnel British Army troops in a certain direction and also leave means of escape and stuff like this while they were preparing to see what kind of activity the British Army would be taking place in the area. There was several incidents with the British Army between the volunteers and stuff, which led to the death of Edward Toomey in one shootout, and later that night 3 volunteers who had been staying in a house which was known as the barracks, which had been part of a training camp for the volunteers for the previous month. The British Army surrounded the house, dragged the volunteers out and put them up against the wall along with 2 other volunteers. And one of the volunteers, Tim Kiley, attempted to prolong the execution so that he could try to make an escape. He kept the officers talking, asking questions and stuff like that, which was when the firing squad did open fire, 2 of the volunteers managed to escape, but 3 of them were shot dead, which was Tim Kiley, Ned Waters and David Hurley. And also the particular weekend was one of the biggest ambushes to take place in Cork, which was the Clonbanin Ambush. It involved up to 100 volunteers, about 40 of them in the actual ambush position itself, which included members of the Newmarket, Mill Street and Kentucky battalions, as well as soldiers and volunteers from Kerry No. 2 Brigade. And on a particular morning they had expected, it was a regular route for the British Army to travel, and on that particular morning they had set up an ambush site stretching over half a mile along the road, and they had planned that they wanted to get a large enemy movement. So the plan was that any lorries that were, or any convoy that only consisted of 1 or 2 lorries were to be left go ahead, and for any convoy consisting of 3 or more lorries, they were to be attacked. Early in the morning, about 10 o'clock, the first convoy came. It was 3 British Army lorries, and Sean Moylan, who was in charge of one of the mines, was set about to press the mine, which was to be the beginning of the attack. The mine failed to go off, and one of the officers beside him set aim to shoot the driver of the first lorry, and his gun didn't work, and therefore the 3 lorries drove through the position. The volunteers stayed in the ambush position, and later that day, about 2 o'clock, another 3 British Army lorries passed that road along with an armoured car and another vehicle, and the volunteers then engaged in, there was no mines, they didn't work in time, but they engaged in hand-to-hand combat in firing with the rifles and stuff like that, and the battle lasted for nearly 4 hours, and at evening time, the volunteers decided to withdraw. They suffered no casualties, and they decided to withdraw because of the proximity to other barracks, as we say, in Kanturk, in Charleville, and in Mill Street, where the shooting would have been heard all over the countryside. So in that particular ambush, there was 13 British soldiers killed and a brigadier general who had been involved in many of the major operations in the North Cork area. And one very interesting thing was one of the weapons used in that ambush was the Hopkins machine gun, which had been taken by a volunteer who was killed in November, Paddy McCarthy, in the raid in Mallow Barracks. And just to kind of give you as well a short overview of a few other incidents that took place in the week surrounding the death of Charles O'Reilly and the Clonbanin Ambush was the Kanturk Battalion Flying Column made an attack on a group of RAC patrol, and they killed one of them, severely wounded the second one. The volunteers under Clonbanin in Street carried out a number of raids in the town, especially in the post office, looking for intelligence. In the Mallow Battalion, burnt down Drummond Castle, as it was expected that maybe another consignment of British Army would take up residence there. In West Cork, a spy was shot, John Good, in the Tim League area, and his cattle were taken and distributed amongst the volunteers in Kilbrittain and Barry Row. And interestingly, only a day later, another spy had been shot in Cork City by Michael Murphy, who was also called John. And that as well. In Newcestown, the volunteers were preparing for what became known as the Crossbarry Ambush, and they were instructed, OC Danny Canty was instructed to gather up all the weapons and bring him to Castletown Kenna. They gathered up 75 weapons, which they brought to the flying column who were assembled, and at the time Tom Barry and Liam Deasy went on reconnaissance. The plan was to set up a major ambush in the Crossbarry area, within the Inishannon area, which later developed as the Crossbarry Ambush. So in the 3 or 4 days around then, the volunteers moved to 7 or 8 different locations around Newcestown, Inishannon, Crossbarry and places to avoid detection. As well, there was an attack below in Copine by volunteers, and as we mentioned there, Richard Newman of Ali's died of gunshot wound when his house had been raided. And on the other attacks, there was a number of attacks inside in Cork City by both the 1st and 2nd battalions on both the auxiliaries and on police barracks. So we'd just like to honour the soldiers, especially Charles Riley, whose graveside we're here today, and Gormina Mahu.